The following preview has been rated Good Bad by the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. Please check out the full episode when it releases on Sunday. Beyond space and time, they come only if you open the box. From the twisted mind of Clive Barker comes a tale of what a woman would do for a good fuck. Starring the killer from Dirty Harry and the one neighbor from Ready Player One, this episode will tear your soul apart. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris. We're doing Hellraiser.
Yes. One that we chose this for, like, kind of our summerish horror pick that we do occasionally.
Yeah, and also, like, we love old versions of horror. Like, we love the 80s horror. We love the really old horror. And it'd been a while since we'd visited it. And we got to talking and we're like, do you remember the actual plot of Hellraiser? Because I don't.
I did, because I had recently watched it with some friends.
But doesn't that feel like give it a month, and honestly, I might forget the plot again.
Nah.
The visuals in this movie, fantastic. The acting, pretty solid, pretty good. The actual logic that happens in the film, almost non-existent.
No, not at all. I mean, it's...
It's there. Mr. Barker has logic. It's possible. He just doesn't tell you what it is.
Yeah, it's like, imagine if Tolkien hadn't written the Silmarillion.
Imagine if Tolkien hadn't bothered to describe half of his book.
Yeah.
Imagine he has removed almost every other page of his book and then, like, been like, but I did think about it.
But that's also what makes Hellraiser so compelling to talk about, is because
I agree.
There is those questions and those mysteries, and that, I mean, that's what Clive Barker mentioned that he was intending to do, is that he purposely left stuff vague so that way, like, he didn't believe in having to explain absolutely everything about his movie to make it complete.
And I agree. I think Hellraiser is one of those weird ones where it has created this cult following because of that potential. Mm-hmm. And also the visuals are pretty damn cool.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, the special effects look great. But I do think that this is one of the ones where you could almost make the argument of, while he does say that, it is very clear that, like, he was hoping that people would buy his book and, like, be into it. He didn't really go out of his way to make this like I don't care what people think about my movie. I'm going to make it how I want. Which I think if he had been that sort of person, which he's not, and is fine. But if he had, I could see this being a more, like, artsy-fartsy horror film. Which I think is what he wanted, but still wanted it accessible.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is, because I know there's a lot of discussion recently about the term elevated horror, which... It's such a stupid term.
It is, because, like, I'm not gonna lie. I think if you come into Hellraiser ready to throw a lot of the extra information out the window and just look at it for what it is and theorize about it with what little information you feel like cherry picking, there's a lot of good concepts that you could, dig around through. But you are making up a lot of it yourself. Which then brings up the discussion of how much did Hellraiser actually start that conversation.
Yeah, I think what it did is it brought it more to a public attention rather than anything else.
I also think that where Hellraiser sits is in the late 80s. And while it is a bit of an anomaly for that specific time period, it does fit in with styling. Like, it looks like an 80s film, and it looks good. It is well acted. It is well written for, what Barker wanted, which is a very specific look. I do think that this film is, for a lot of people, their, like, testing point to see if they would be interested in a different style of horror, which nowadays we have terms for. And it's things like extreme gore horror. It's things like body horror. It's things like international horror. I'm
pretty sure I saw Tokyo Gore Police and Ichi the Killer before I watched Hellraiser.
Yeah, we've talked about how you do things backwards, though. And I think while this isn't necessarily people's, like, jumping off point, because this movie does distinguish itself from those genres very well, and, like, it holds those boundaries very firmly, I do think that, like, it's one of those movies where, like, you have a friend who's really into, like, all of the horror. And they will put this on and be like, how did you react to that? Okay, now we can take it a step, and I'm going to see if I can get you into X, Y, or Z.
Yeah,
this is a good testing the waters.
Movie-wise, I have a very... what's the term? I feel very akin to Frank's journey through.
Yeah, where like you've fallen down the slippery slope of the Pinhead world.
Oh, I'm at the bottom of the hole.
I know. You have fallen, Julia, fully into the box world. But like, I think that this one toes that line really nicely where like, the gore isn't, it's good gore, but like, it's not so visual that like, I think if you weren't into it, it would like ruin horror movies for you. It's a bit much, but it's also not so much that like you feel scarred.
Yeah, it's by today's standards, it's relatively tame. But
it's over the top, but like it's all very practical effects. But they took such a liberty with like what the anatomy looks like that you can tell that that's not what a person looks like.
Oh yeah, but it's fun. That's
the thing though. It's fun, but in a very serious way.
Yeah, that's exactly why Hellraiser is such a good horror film, is because
yes, it does feel a little bit like you're making fun of your like literature professor, where like they are taking themselves very seriously and you are mocking them in the back of the room.
Yeah, very much so.
But like in a sweet and I love it sort of way. Like now that I have rewatched it and like remembered it, I probably am going to like this Halloween like put it back in my rotation of like in the old-timey horror movie collection that we normally run through. I'm probably going to stick it back in there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worth a rewatch if you haven't seen it in a while, at least.
Yeah, definitely.
And it kind of makes me want to go back and actually go back through the entire franchise, because I have the first 3 now, but...
Yeah, and like, it has been a really long time since I read the books, and I remember reading them and being kind of disappointed that there wasn't an exorbitant amount more. I had definitely gotten used to that, where like, oh, this is by, like, it's written by the same guy, like, surely he has expanded on the world. Like, we see that a lot with movies and books, where like you lose a lot in adaptations.
Yeah, I mean,
you didn't really lose a lot, but now that I've rewatched it, and now that I think that I'm going through it, knowing that this is meant to be more novella, poetic sort of nonsense, kind of want to go back and reread his stuff.
Yeah, I probably will pick up his works at some point. I'm just busy.
I do think that now that you've rewatched it, I do think that like if you enjoyed it, you would enjoy the books sort of thing. So that might also be I know that was kind of what he was hoping, that if you liked the movie, you would read his books, because he's definitely a writer.
Well, he was right, because I've been interested in reading that and what Midnight Meat Train is based on.
Yes.
So
yeah.
But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird previews.
Check out the full episode.
Press play. We will come again.
Tee.
Peace.